They say the mountains of Kentucky hold more than coal. They hold memory. Not the sweet kind you tuck away in family photo albums, but the kind that gnaws at you when the night is long and the air too still. These hills remember the blood poured into their soil, the voices lost in their minds, the prayers whispered at altars built of broken stone and bone. Folks here know better than to walk alone under a moonless sky. They've heard the voices that call from tree lines, voices that sound too much like loved ones gone to the grave. They've heard promises whispered in the wind, the kind that make you step off the safe path and into the briar. And once you've stepped into the briar, you may not come back the same if you come back at all. This story begins with a boy, but it is not only his story. It belongs to the men who guard a rock that should not exist, to a woman raised on shadows and sharpened like a blade, and to a prince who waits in forgotten places, patient as frost. Their fates will collide in ways that shake loose the dust of a century's worth of violence and force the living to reckon with the sins of the dead. Ethan Cole had never known his parents. Folks said his daddy was a drifter and his mama too young to fight her kin. Whatever the truth, by the time he was 12, Ethan belonged to nobody but himself. The county sent him to live with his grandmother, a woman with eyes like river stones and a voice rough from a lifetime of coal dust. Her little clapboard house sat on the edge of Harlan, close enough to the Virginia line that men with rifles sometimes disappeared into the ridges when the law came sniffing. Ethan had only two possessions worth a damn: a pocket knife dulled from carving his initials into fence posts, and an old leather Bible that had belonged to his grandmother. That Bible was more than scripture. Its inside cover carried names scrawled in fading ink branches of a family tree that should have offered Ethan a sense of belonging. Instead, when he traced those spidery lines, he found gaps, scratched out names, and cryptic notes. Beside one branch was written simply, "Cursed." Another bore the word, "Gone." When the bank finally nailed the doors of his grandmother's house shut and sent Ethan wandering, he clutched the book to his chest. He wasn't looking for the good news of the gospel. He was looking for answers. And in those pages, beyond the genealogies, he found something else, a testament not of faith, but of bargains. Names of men who had given themselves to powers older than any preacher dared mention. One phrase, written in shaky hand, repeated again and again: "Seek the men of the rock." There's a place deep in West Virginia where the land itself feels wrong. They call it Miller's Rock, a jagged monolith that juts from the earth on the edge of the only natural lake for miles around. The water there never warms, even in high summer. Folks say the coal beneath it burns hot and soft, like it was born of something other than the world we know. Ethan heard whispers in mining camps, in flop houses, in roadside diners. Men warned him to keep moving, to never go near the rock. Outsiders weren't welcome. But every warning was an invitation to a boy with no home and no kin. By the time he found the lake, frost clung to the edges of fallen leaves though it was late October. The rock towered above him, black as midnight, its surface slick though no rain had fallen. Ethan felt eyes on him, not human eyes, something older, patient, waiting to see if he would come closer. He did, while Ethan searched for family. Across the state line, another child of these hills had grown into a woman forged by shadows. Her name was Margaret Blackwell, though most knew her only as the judge's daughter. Her father, Judge Amos Blackwell, built an empire from coal, blood, and fear. He tore down mountains, bought politicians like livestock, and sent men into the ground until their lungs turned black. Her mother was a cold spot in a grand house, more ghost than wife. Margaret was not raised, she was honed. From girlhood, she watched her father summon broken men, hollow them out, and fill them with obedience. She learned early that fear could be a currency, and cruelty an inheritance. By 25, she wore silks imported from New York and jewels purchased with lives. She had a taste for mirrors framed in bones, combs carved from the remains of men who had crossed her family. She had seen hollow men stumble from the mines with empty eyes and rasping breaths, their humanity stripped away to feed her father's empire. And Margaret loved it. She believed power belonged to those willing to reach into the dark and pull out what others feared to touch. beyond Miller's Rock, deeper than even miners dared go. There was a presence known only in whispers. Some called him the Amber Prince, a figure draped in frost and shadow, crowned with light that glowed like sap trapped in stone. He had waited centuries in forgotten places where the sun never reached. He waited for those who sought him, men desperate for fortune, women hungry for dominion, children willing to trade innocence for survival. The prince was patient. He offered nothing freely, but for those who bent the knee, he gave power sharp as broken glass, wealth heavy as cold dust, and strength that could outlast death. And so, when Ethan stood at Miller's Rock clutching his grandmother's Bible, the prince stirred. Another seeker had come. Ethan wasn't alone at the lake. Men emerged from the tree-lined faces smeared with soot, eyes hollow yet burning. They called themselves the Watchers of the Rock. Their leader, a man named Caleb Boone, spoke in a voice that rasped like coal dragged over stone. "You've come with a book that don't belong to you," Caleb said. "That book carries debts. Boy, debts you don't want to pay." Ethan raised the Bible. "I want to know my name, my blood. Why nobody in this county would take me in. Why they turned their backs." The Watchers laughed, low and cruel. "Because your people bargained here. Long before you were born. You carry their curse. And now you've come to finish what they started." Behind them, the rock pulsed faintly, like the heartbeat of the mountain itself. Margaret Blackwell arrived in a black motorcar, its tires crunching the frosted earth. She stepped out in heels that should have sunk into the dirt, but didn't, as if the ground itself feared to stain her. The Watchers bowed their heads. Caleb Boone kissed her gloved hand. "Daughter of the judge," he said, "the rock remembers your family." Margaret's smile was cold. "It should. My father built his throne on its power. Now he's gone, and I intend to wear his crown." Her gaze fell on Ethan. "And who is this stray?" "A coal boy," Boone answered, "looking for kin." Margaret's eyes gleamed. "Then he's mine to shape. Blood calls to blood." That night, by firelight, Ethan read aloud the names in his Bible. Each name summoned a whisper, a presence pressing close. Margaret watched him with hunger, seeing in him both a threat and an opportunity. The Amber Prince's voice slid through the flames. "Child of Cole, child of Blackwell, both of you have come. One will serve, one will fall." The Watchers fell silent. Boone dropped to his knees. Margaret stood taller, unflinching. Ethan clutched the Bible, heart hammering. "What do you want?" Ethan asked. The prince's answer came like frost in his veins. "Choice." The rock split. From its core poured a light the color of burning sap, and with it a host of hollow men. Faces twisted, bodies bent. They swarmed the camp, dragging Watchers into the dark. Ethan and Margaret stood back to back, fighting not with swords, but with will. She commanded, her voice sharp as glass, and the hollow men faltered. Ethan raised the Bible, shouting the names inside, and each name cracked the air like thunder. The Amber Prince rose, crowned in amber flame, and stretched forth his hand. "Choose." Ethan saw visions, himself powerful, feared, no longer an orphan, or himself empty, another pawn in Margaret's empire. Margaret whispered, "Take his gift. Together we could rule." But Ethan thought of his grandmother's stone eyes, of neighbors who had starved while the judge grew fat, of miners who had died with lungs full of ash. He made his choice.